Hello and hi. Let me read out a question that Israelites had in 1 Samuel chapter 4. Okay, Israelites were very confused. They were going to war and 4,000 of their people died, and then they asked, hey, why has God defeated us today? That is the same question we are asking today. Why are our loved ones dying? 4,000 people of our people died and God has defeated us. What's up? And then they say, let us go bring up the Ark of the Covenant from Shiloh. And from Shiloh they bring up the Ark of the Covenant, and the Ark of the Covenant comes and everybody is shouting the shout of victory, and the whole earth shook. And the enemy, when they heard the sound of praise in the camp of Israel, they got afraid, because they understood that the Ark of the Covenant is here now. And still they go on to not only lose the war, they lost the Ark of the Covenant to their enemies, and 30,000 people died. And everybody with their tails between their legs ran and fled to their tents, because they were all afraid. See, that's what happens, when death suddenly happens. Everybody is so afraid at this point that not just the Ark of the Covenant, nothing works. The fear that people had gotten. And we will right now look at why that happened. We will right now look at why in this instance did the people lose the war. Why did in this instance was Israel just so vulnerable? And Israelites did not even understand this. They were saying, why has the Lord defeated us today? I mean, what's just happened? Why is the Ark of the Covenant not working today? 30,000 people died. What's up? I'll tell you what's up. It was because of the failure of their high priest. Eli was a high priest of Israel at this point. And high priests, right? These guys represent Israel. They represent Israel to God. And on the Day of Atonement, the high priest, what does he do? He atones for the whole of Israel. So on the breastplate that he has 12 stones representing all the 12 tribes of Israel. And then when he makes a sacrifice for them, he makes a sacrifice for Israel. And therefore Israel becomes acceptable before the Lord. But before that, he also makes a sacrifice for himself. He makes a sacrifice for his sins. Now, Eli must be a good man, I don't know. Eli must be a very humble man. Perhaps he was, a man who was well respected. But then the Bible shows that Eli failed in one aspect. And he failed in disciplining his children. And when the word of the Lord comes to Samuel, and Samuel, being a 5-year-old, gives this message to Eli, saying, hey, the Lord, see, let me read out the message to you. He says, for I have seen the iniquity, and I will judge him forever for the iniquity which Eli knows because of his children. Eli knows an iniquity because of his children. Now this word know, K-N-O-W, it doesn't mean Eli was familiar with his children's iniquity. It doesn't mean Eli was aware of his children's iniquity. But it means Eli participated in their children's iniquity. He partook and he propagated their children's iniquity. How? By not restraining them, by not disciplining them. And therefore, God was going to judge Eli. Now, if you think about it, if the high priest is being judged, that means the whole of Israel is being judged. If the high priest is being punished, the whole of Israel is going to face the brunt of it. Because whenever the high priest gives an offering and the offering is accepted, the whole of Israel gets, they all have good food, good grain, good harvest, and they start winning wars. But then if the high priest is failing, what happens is no food, famines, and then what? They start losing wars. And in this instance, Eli failed. The high priest who represents Israel failed. And he was going to be judged before the Lord. Now you need to understand, the Ark of the Covenant was working. The Ark of the Covenant will not change. The word of the Lord is same yesterday, today, and forever. He does not change yesterday, today, and forever. He's the same. Now the Ark of the Covenant, in some instances it worked, and in this instance did it not work? No, that is not to say like that. In fact, the Ark of the Covenant really worked. It worked because the atonement of the children of Israel was not happening. And because it did not happen, the children of Israel were not holy. They were not, they were not the chosen people yet. Because every year you needed to sacrifice. And for this time, Eli was rejected. Therefore, the whole of Israel was rejected. And because the whole of Israel rejected, even the Ark of the Covenant could not help these people. And people died. In fact, what happens is the Ark of the Covenant goes into capture and captivity, and the Philistines put the Ark of the Covenant in the temple of Dagon. And what happens is the Ark of the Covenant starts doing what it does best, because there is no other principality that can stand before the Ark of the Covenant. So the idol of Dagon, it falls face first. It falls face flat on the floor in front of the Ark of the Covenant. Why? No God of this earth can stand before the God that you and I serve. No God that you and I know, no God that you and I are familiar with can stand before our God. So the devil, the god of this air, cannot stand before God. See, what happens is, Israel not just lost the war, but when the people, Philistines, started getting sick with tumors and all of that, they sent the Ark of the Covenant back to Israel. They said, hey, you know what, we had enough of this, we don't want this, it's only bringing death to us. So they send the Ark of the Covenant back into Israel, and the Ark of the Covenant comes to Beth Shemesh. And in Beth Shemesh, what happens is, Israel, still not having a high priest, not being atoned for, and not being allowed into the Holy of Holies, because whoever goes into the Holies of Holies will die, they look into the Holy of Holies. They open the Ark of the Covenant and they look. I wonder, 50,000 people died that time. So the death started with 4,000 people, upped itself to 30,000, and then upped itself to 50,000 by this time. And what's happening here? The reason that Israel died that day is because they were not allowed and they were not eligible to enter into the Holies of Holies. But then, if you look in Hebrews chapter 4, we have a different high priest. Now, no longer Eli is our high priest. Our high priest becomes this other man called Jesus. This other man called Jesus is a very good high priest. In fact, it says he is our great high priest. Let me open Hebrews chapter 4. In Hebrews chapter 4, it says, seeing then that we have this great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus the Son of God, let us hold fast our confession, for we do not have a high priest who cannot sympathize with our weaknesses, but in all points and temptations was tempted as we were, and yet without sin. Let us therefore come boldly into this throne of grace, that we may obtain mercy, find grace in the time of help, find grace and help in the time of need. The whole coin shifted right now. Israel lost because their high priest lost. Israel died because their high priest was being judged, and he was being judged forever. Israel was basically, facing the brunt, and they did not know why. It was because of their high priest. But today, you and I will face blessings. You and I will face a greater grace and mercy and help in the time of need because of your great high priest. And this high priest is Jesus. And this high priest is not like Eli. This high priest he's already judged once and for all. He was judged and without sin. He was blameless before the Lord, and therefore what does he do? He goes in the Holies of Holies and he's making atonement. He's making intercession for you day after day after day. So right now, like Moses did. See, again, Eli's response when he heard the message from Samuel. Samuel came and told him, hey, you're going to be judged by God. And then Eli says, oh, it is God, let him do what he wants to do. I think that was a very prideful response from Eli. Because if Eli, I think that was very prideful, because first of all, Eli was so puffed up and he was having a very soft spot towards his children, and nobody could tell him anything about his children, and he would just not listen to it. And now here comes a 5-year-old boy who's bringing the message from God about the judgment of Eli's family. And Eli says, okay, it's God, let him do what he wants to do. I'm not going to do anything right now. I can't do anything right now. And then he was too prideful to change. But then if you look in previous instances, Moses came to know that the Lord wants to kill Israel, each and every last one of them. And then what does Moses do? He stands the gap for Israel and he says, Lord, please, no, change your mind. That's not what you brought them out of Egypt for. Just don't do this. Your name has to be glorified. So what does God do? Changes his mind, does not kill Israel. Abraham, what does Abraham do? He looks at God and he says, hey, God, if you're going to Sodom and for 50 righteous people, will you spare Sodom? God will say, yeah, fine, sure. For 10 people, will you spare Sodom? Yeah, fine, sure. See, God kept changing his mind because of the intercession of his people. Even Hezekiah, if you look, the messenger of the Lord comes to Hezekiah and he says, Hezekiah, set your things in order. What's happening is you're going to be dying, basically. And then Hezekiah will go and he'll start crying. He'll say, Lord, I don't want to die. I want to live. Give me 15 years. And the messenger of the Lord, after delivering the message to Hezekiah, on his way back, gets another message from the Lord. And then what does he do? He turns back. He turns back and he says, he goes back to Hezekiah and says, yes, 15 years granted. Eli did not make that intercession. Eli did not stand the gap, but Jesus stands the gap for you. Jesus is making intercession for you. So right now what is happening is, the person who's dying is not you. The person who's dying is Dagon. When the Ark of the Covenant goes into the presence of anything that is not holy, what happens is the unholy things have to fall. So what happened when the presence of the Lord went into the presence of Dagon? Dagon fell. I'm telling you, sickness right now falls. Today you are not going to fall. Today you are not going to have the question saying, hey Lord, why am I being defeated? Why are my loved ones being taken away? I'll tell you why they are being taken away. They are taken away because you still did not accept in the high priestness of Jesus Christ. And another thing is, Eli's children, they knew God, but they did not know God. That's what the Bible describes him. In fact, I can just bring it up. They knew God, but they did not know God. I mean, they were familiar with God, but they were not communing with God. They had an idea of an institution with God, but they had no relationship with God. And that was dangerous. And what did that cost them? A lot. Let me just look that up, okay? For okay, I'm just looking it up here. No, my sons, for it is not a good report I hear. Okay, fine. Now the sons of Eli were corrupt. They did not know the Lord. I mean, chapter 2, verses 12. The sons of Eli were corrupt. They did not know the Lord. I mean, they were familiar with God, but they did not know God. That's what Christians are in a place right now. They are familiar with God. I'm telling you, today people are dying not because of the unfaithfulness of God, not because God is not able, but because the people are not communing with God, because of a lack of prayer, because of a lack of spending time in their knees, because they are having faith in the sword of Joshua rather than having faith in the hands of Moses that won the victory of that war. People right now look at the things that they can see, the medicines, the facilities, the infrastructure, and they want to have victory that way. But I'm telling you, victory is the Lord's. Victory comes from the high priest. Victory it has to, because you have a high priest in Jesus, because the priesthood is in Jesus. What happens? You can now come boldly into the throne of grace. You can look into the holies of holies and you're not going to die, because in that holies of holies, because of the sacrifice of Jesus, right now you and I, we have help, we have grace, we have mercy and help in the time of need. So right now, what is the grace you want? What is the mercy you need, and what is the help you need? Ask it in the name of Jesus, and then you shall receive because of your high priest. Today your high priest stands for you. Your high priest represents you. Now there is no weapon that is forming against you that will prosper. Nothing that is forming against you will come and bear root, because it has to be uprooted and be thrown flat into the sea, because that is the destiny of the devil. Dagon falls on his face. The God of this earth has to fall and has to surrender because of the Ark of the Covenant, in front of the Ark of the Covenant. So right now you look at your sickness and you speak to it and you say, sickness, the time is coming, because the Ark is being lifted. When the bronze serpent was lifted up, and when everybody looked at the serpent, whoever looked at it, they were made alive. I'm telling you, banner your covenant, lift up the Ark and shout a shout of praise, that when your enemy hears that shout, that trembling will go through his spine. I'm telling you, you are healed. You have the victory. Dagon and all the gods of this earth have to fall before your God. The God that you know is absolutely faithful, and the high priest that represents you, he is the great high priest. So rejoice, and that's it, I guess. Have a happy day, and God bless you.